How do you ensure that your supplier is going to deliver as they say they should? Hi, and welcome back to Procurement 4.0, the channel where we speak about procurement. My name is Lucy, and I'm a procurement professional based in the UK. In today's video, we're going to speak about supplier relationship management. I'm going to give you tips on how to manage that relationship. Supplier relationship is really around how you're going to manage a supplier once a contract has been awarded. So in terms of the procurement process, you as a buyer receive a requirement, you went to tender, then awarded a contract to a supplier. Supplier relationship came once that contract has been awarded and when you need to manage that relationship. So what are the key tips? So first of all, you need to make sure to consider that relationship element when you are drafting your tender documentations. You need to provide into the document how you are going to manage it and what are your expectations. Really make sure to do market research to ensure that you are not asking more than suppliers on the market can deliver. So first tip would be really to select the right supplier by putting what are your expectations into the contract and ensure they are not over the moon. Second, you really need to have a collaborations mindset. Yes, it can be hard work to manage a supplier, but you need to ensure to have regular contact with that supplier, and not only when things are going wrong. You really want to have a process in place or meetings in place where you can touch base with your supplier, ensuring you have that continuous relationship. Third, you need to leverage or to take advantage of KPIs, so key performance indicators. There really are metrics you could be using or you must be using to ensure that your supplier is performing in a good way. In terms of defining this key performance indicator, you should make sure you don't have too many of them. In general, best practices around 6 or 7 is our number, like a manageable number. And you need to review this performance on a regular basis with your suppliers, really making sure that they match these indicators. And then last but not least, you need to have a continuous improvement mindset. So in terms of continuous improvement, it's really to have that collaborations with your suppliers and ensure you continuously develop the service or the product and making sure you are both aligned as a buyer and as a supplier. Let's now have a focus on KPIs. KPIs are really metrics where you are going to be able, using these numbers, to understand how well the supplier is performing. In terms, you really need to be careful in terms of how you are going to define these metrics, because it's where the suppliers can have penalties, for instance. So let's start from the beginning. When you draft your contract, you need to understand how you are going to evaluate the supplier. So be specific and be clear. When you write that KPIs, you really need to be really clear, really in terms of like plain English, what that KPIs means, and you need to understand how you are going to measure that. So for instance, let's speak about lead time. You want the supplier to deliver a service correctly 95% of the time. So in terms of like good practice, you mentioned that you want to have that service deliver and you have the metric in place. So you know that if the supplier is delivering like 95% or over on time, then they have been successful. In terms of like bad practice, the element you will have mentioned in the contract is that the supplier needs to deliver on time. But you don't really know what that means. By saying that the supplier needs to deliver on time, so meaning that the good or the service is at the warehouse, for instance, 95% or over the time, then you really have that specific element you can judge the supplier on. Please be mindful that sometimes, for instance, in my delivery time, there could be like exemptions, for instance, where you might need to review that KPIs based on the ongoing aspect of the contract. Then, when you have this element in place, you need to have like multiple other KPIs, but don't go over the top, and really having like 6-7 metrics you can actually work with the supplier. Review them on a regular basis. So for instance, on a monthly basis, every 2 months, 3 months, the contract should name the frequency on how often you are going to review these KPIs. And make sure to work with your supplier, because the contract during its lifetime can't change. Also, challenge yourself. You could also have KPIs as a buyer, and like that you really have that like dual relationship with the supplier. Another element to mention about KPIs is more in terms of like the incentivizations behind it. The supplier might be happy to have a KPIs and to work towards something, but you might want to link that KPIs with a financial or non-financial incentive. So that could be a positive or a negative one. For instance, on a previous contract I was working on, if the supplier wasn't like reaching that KPI for 2 to 3 months, so 3 months in that case, they will have to give back a certain amount of money. You could do that, or you could also have something more positive, saying that if the supplier reached the target 3 months in a row, then they will have an extra bonus. That's really depending on your services, the relationship you want to have with your supplier. Then the last point is that don't forget that the contract needs to change, and that perhaps KPIs that were relevant 2 years ago are not anymore. So really make sure that as a buyer, you keep relevant with what's going on in the market. That's all for today's video. Thanks for listening, and if you have any questions, please put them into the comment section.